Now with the actions reducer set up, at least the basics about it, and our store connected to the application, let's fill our reducer with some life. And in the end, we have to handle the two actions we set up here, adding ingredients and removing ingredients. Therefore, as always, I'll add my switch statement in the reducer and switch the action type. Keep in mind, you always have to have a type property on your action. This is why we can safely access it here. Now, we got two types we want to handle in our case statements. The first one is the action type add ingredient, where we want to return some object which holds the new state. The second one is the case where we have our action types and their remove ingredient. And here too, we want to return some store or some state object. And finally, we always want to return just state in case we make it into none of these cases, though here my IDE, due to linting, complains that we should have a default state, or default handler I mean. So let's simply add default to our switch statement and return the state here. This will be reached if none of the cases applies. Again, we don't need break statements because we return in each case anyways, so the code execution won't continue in this function. Now, to add ingredients, we of course want to add them to our ingredients object. Now here we start with null, but keep in mind in the burger builder, we start with null because in component did mount, we actually load our ingredients, our starting ingredients, from the internet. This is something I will re-add, but for now, since we haven't learned how to handle asynchronous code here, I will ignore this here. We'll basically comment out the code in component did mount, and instead start with my ingredients set up here in the state. So here, ingredients will not be null in my reducer, but instead be an object where we have salad 0, bacon 0, cheese 0, and meat 0. Again, this is just a temporary reversal. Now, when we add an ingredient, we of course need to get the information which ingredient that is. And for that given ingredient, we then simply need to add 1. So we don't need to get the amount because it's always +1, but we need to know which ingredient it is. So what we will do here is, first of all, we'll copy the entire old state with the spread operator, so that when we set new ingredients, we also keep any other properties around by distributing them over this new JavaScript object first. But that then is the second thing we want to do. Set ingredients to something new. Ingredients should now also be a new JavaScript object. Immutability, don't reuse the old one, create a new one, where I first of all distribute all properties of state ingredients. Again, doing this to really create a new object. Just distributing state here won't do that because it doesn't create deep clones of objects. It doesn't go into objects and create new objects for these two. It simply just copies the surrounding object, but ingredients, which is an object on its own, would still point to that old object. Well, we fix this by spreading out the properties of that old object into a new object here. Now with that, in this new ingredients object, we want to override the given ingredient, which we need to get as a payload of this action. Now in ES6 there's this special syntax you can use to dynamically override a property in a given JavaScript object. You can use square brackets. Now this does not create an array here. Instead here, you can now pass a variable or something which contains the name you actually want to use as a property name. And I expect to get that property name on my action, maybe on a ingredient name property. Now ingredient name is something we get as a payload to the action, and then here we simply distribute all ingredients into our new object. So this object then holds salad, meat, bacon, and cheese. And one of these, whichever that is, which we receive as a payload of the action, will receive a new value. We target it with this syntax, and then with colon and the new value, well, we set this new value. The new value now simply is state, ingredients, then again select the given ingredient name, So this now fetches the old value for that ingredient, so like 0 or 1 or whatever it was. And then we add +1. So now here we get the number of the old ingredients, add 1, and assign this to this ingredient where we override the copy we created here. Now we're returning a new version of the state with the updated ingredients. So that is how we add an ingredient. How do we remove one? Well, for removing, I also want to create a new version of my state where I simply decrement one ingredient by one. And for that, we can of course start by copying that code here from the add ingredient logic. We still copy the old state, and then I distribute the ingredient properties into this new ingredients object. I take the ingredient I receive as an action payload for this case here too, but now I don't add one, I remove one. And with that, we got a reducer which should be able to update our ingredients. It won't update the price right now. We'll take care about this later. But we will update our ingredients here. Now, with that, in the next lecture, I obviously want to connect this to my burger builder so that we use that reducer and these actions to manage the ingredients we add to our burger or remove from it.